Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome, everyone, to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and the implications for the world at large. We are your host. I am Corey Pheez Lee, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I am Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
Great, and Happy New Year. We are recording this on Thursday, the 2nd of January, 2025. And in a little bit, we'll be discussing what is America and what does it offer its most vulnerable citizens.
And before we do, I just want to let you know, as always, that Super Adaptables this year is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers. So, for some, America is a land that flows with milk and honey, where opportunity is afforded to everyone, and living the American dream isn't merely an ideal, but a reality. This belief is rooted in hard work and education, which seems to be within reach of all its citizens, and even extended to those who aren't. However, many do not echo the same sentiment and are more cautiously optimistic about this country and its future.
Americans are divided on whether the American dream is really possible. In April of 2024, a Pew Research poll was done on the attainability of the American dream. 53% said they believe it's possible, 41% said it was once possible, and 6% felt it was never achievable. Despite the advances in the ADA, living in a country with both physical and legislative barriers further compounds the problem of having equal access to gainful employment and the community.
The ADA being Americans with Disabilities Act. And, a really interesting note on where the phrase, the American dream, came from. It actually is the center of the thesis of a 1931 bestseller called The Epic of America by James Treslow Adams. And he defines, so this is right after the Great Depression. America's in the middle of the Great Depression, and he writes this book, which he originally wanted to be called The American Dream, but it wouldn't sell. So he defines the American dream as a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitousness of circumstances of birth or position. So, not dependent on the circumstances of where you're born in society or whether you're born rich or poor, you're able to achieve that. It's an interesting side note that he wanted to start this discussion in the middle of the Great Depression. So according to the United States Census Bureau, the disability community makes up about 44.1 million people, or 13.4% of the non-institutionalized population. Though this community consists of diverse, differently abled individuals, the ability to go out and have a fair shot, just like the rest of society, seems elusive. Due to inequities, it is important to note that safeguards such as social programs like Medicaid are of grave importance to people and persons with disabilities. These entitlement programs are the bedrock of our Constitution, which says to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
I think that's such a ironic, and our response to it is very hypocritical because our nation tends to start off with great ideas and great ideals and what have you, from the Revolutionary War all the way up until, the remark that you made about the gentleman, James Adams, this idea, and then we take it and it just kind of gets manipulated over time and becomes a bit of a monster itself. So like you said, this time period, the Great Depression, where unemployment and poverty is conquering everyone, and people are looking for a way out. They need government help. They need government assistance. And, yes, the Depression was happening, but, the the view of the publisher was, well, this isn't going to sell. So you're just worried about the money in the financial aspect in the game rather than the people. And that's why we need to address this. So it's going to be nice because this year, the Super Adaptables podcast will be covering a variety of topics, mainly focused on social safety nets, their function, and how maintaining them keeps in step with American values and makes whatever anyone with or without a disability dreams not only attainable, but equitable and accessible for everyone, especially the most vulnerable. That is truly American.
In this month, starting with today, Corey and I will be sharing our own questions and thoughts regarding social safety nets, discussing your experience with these programs, and then speaking with experts about the importance of these programs and what is holding them back from their future potential. And finally, at the end of the month, at the end of each month, I should say, sharing with you some practical takeaways to help make that future a reality. And each month this year, we'll be focusing on a different issue. This month, January will be kind of an overview of all the different programs we'll be discussing. But we'll be covering things like healthcare, Medicaid and Medicare, Social Security cash benefits, SSI and SSDI, affordable, accessible housing, accessible transportation, veterans benefits, employment resources like vocational rehab, and SNAP and or otherwise known as food stamps, among other safety net programs that are really vital for us to be able to live and function as normal people in a democracy.
Indeed. And, that's the primary goal. And so let's get right into it. This idea, again, of the American dream. How do we know democracy is the right way to secure the American dream?
Well, that's a great question, Corey. And, as I mentioned, James Adams, not to be confused with the former president, James Treslow Adams, he came up with this idea of the American dream. This wasn't an accident at the time of the Great Depression. At that time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president. And, we've all heard about the New Deal and what that administration did to get the country back on its feet, the jobs programs. And that was really where American social safety net programs began. And I just want to start, with a quote that he gave when he introduced the New Deal, the concept of the New Deal, and fighting for everyday Americans to the American people, which was, formerly, the powers of government were really dominated by business, by big business. Those are the people who are making the policies, the decisions. You wonder how we got the great stock market crash and the Great Depression. It was because there was very little regulation. And so Roosevelt says, the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerated the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That is in its essence fascism, ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or any controlling private power. And I heard that quote reading this great book called what is it? Democracy Awakening: Notes on the State of America by Heather Cox Richardson, which I encourage everyone to read. Talking about progressivism and where all of these safety net programs come from and how it links to democratic values. But I think that quote is true. Social safety net systems are essential for preserving democracy because without them, vulnerable individuals, whether you're born that way or you become that through an injury or an accident, we cannot participate or survive without these programs. And not yet affected individuals, if you're still able-bodied, you function in your everyday life with severe risk of becoming bankrupt, losing your job, losing your health care, losing your retirement, if you're forced into poverty just to pay for your medical expenses out of pocket. And we all know that who has the most expensive healthcare costs and systems and prices in the world? US of A, which is run by big private businesses for the most part. So without the voices of the most vulnerable being heard, only the strong dominate. And that is, what leads to fascism and authoritarianism. So
that was very well put and well said. And I think that inherently strikes fear in everyone who is leaning on the system as a crutch, no pun intended. But that's something that we're definitely going to get into a little bit later. But in conclusion, um, our democracy is not indestructible because of that. Yes,
Yeah.
there's fundamental things that we have placed. We have mechanisms that we can hope to safeguard, but with each changing and passing administration, those things kind of get adjusted, amended, and changed, and sometimes they don't benefit the people who need it the most. But with the erosion of social safety nets, we can effectively lose all of our rights and the practical ability to even vote and participate as citizens.
No, absolutely. I mean, and again, to bring us back, we'll talk about the history of these programs in more depth in the coming months. Um, but to bring us back to the time of the Great Depression, the New Deal, when a lot of this or the seeds of them began, this is at a time when um, not everyone could vote. This is at a time when there was no yet right to join a union. There were no set working hours. Child labor was not banned yet. Um, there were great factory fires in our uh, growing cities where workers were locked inside by their bosses so that they couldn't leave. And hundreds of people would die in these fires. Um, so, workers' rights, all of these things are really tied inextricably to a functioning democracy. Um, because without those, we really do not have much power. Um, so yeah. And Corey, you and I have experienced, some of these programs that I mentioned in our own lives, and tell us a little bit about what programs you've been affected by and how have they benefited you.
Yeah, that's uh, definitely a good question. So for me, um, I am a veteran. I served from 2001 to 2005, and I was getting ready to actually re-enlist because I love this country and I love serving and I love being a part of a even smaller community within the military that wants to protect and defend democracy, both here
Mm,
and abroad. Um, and so participating and having the ability to take advantage of VA benefits, which obviously these programs were established before I was born. Post Civil War, they would give pensions to vets coming back, and there's also in 100 years from that point on, Medicare and Medicaid was established. So the programs are designed as the Constitution states, and for its posterity, for future generations to be able to utilize them. So veterans benefits and Medicare are two of the programs that I utilize the most. How about you?
yeah, I mean, so when I was injured, when I fell off a 70-foot cliff in northern India when I was 19, I was still on my parents' private insurance. My father worked for a university, and so I got health insurance through him, through I think it's called a Cobra extension, past 19 for a few more years. And then I had to, I would get kicked off of that and I would have been forced into Medicaid by necessity. And except that in 2010, the Affordable Care Act was passed, which was just in the nick of time because I was getting out of college, wanting to work, and we can get into the details later. But Medicaid has depending on the state, some states have asset and income limits to be on the only insurance that covers for adequate caregiving and um, other resources for people with disabilities like you and me, Corey. Um, but at the time that I graduated, the Affordable Care Act made it illegal for private insurance companies to discriminate against people with disabilities. So they had to offer me the same plan that they offered everyone else. So I was able to get private healthcare insurance through that at a subsidized rate, and I was also able to access accessible, affordable housing through the New Haven Housing Authority, um, and that was a great resource for me. But of course, I didn't access those benefits until years after my injury. Until then, it was kind of dependent on old systems out of my parents' insurance and um, staying living with them. Uh, I was not yet benefiting from any of those other programs.
Uh, and I think that's a broader conversation that America and its citizens we need to, and I think also globally, that we need to have with our children. We don't talk about when we ask them the general question, well, what's your plan in life? Like, what do you want to do? And we kind of pigeonhole them to say, oh, I just want to have a career in this. So career day is filled with being a police officer, doing all these great things and great careers, but all the intricacies by the time you're 18 and ready to leave the house and you are exposed to the world and you're no longer under those certain safeguards that are established through your parents, we're very much unprepared. We
Yeah,
don't, we're not thinking about, I know I wasn't, like from the time I hit 18 and, maybe 2 weeks or so before I turned 18, I had joined the military and then, or at least I started signing up for the Navy. And then I became 18 and nobody was like, well, what kind of insurance are you going to have? How are you going to be covered? Like, what if I broke my leg or something summer of 2001? Like, I didn't know that I was going to be covered under my mom. I assumed that. But in hindsight, what was I supposed to do? And if I didn't join the military, where was I going to go get dental coverage and stuff like that, right? So I think that, this introduction into understanding why protections are required needs to be had at a very early age. Some people differ. They may say, kids shouldn't worry about those things till later. Well, they're not going to be kids forever, right? And you were able to take advantage of those things because of that access to private insurance
yeah. I
for
mean,
your family.
right. I mean, I didn't have to look for those things. Those were built into the system, at least for the private insurance, just in time. Um, I Googled, accessible housing, um, and was pretty poor at the time, my own bank account. So I was able to
I think
access
we
that.
all were.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Um, Although I forgot to mention, I also greatly benefited from vocational rehab. So that actually, helped pay for some caregiving when I was at college. I was able to hire fellow students, people in the community to come and help me. And I started college 6 months after my injury, so that was super helpful. They also helped pay for um, some vehicle modifications and I think some other like a standing wheelchair and some other things. So those are incredible resources that are examples of this.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, for me, um, so it's like even while you're in the service, right? Like there is dental. You don't even have to travel for dental. It's literally on your ship. You know what I mean? You don't have to travel for medical. It's on your ship. And if you lived on the ship like me, that's just walking a few decks down or so. But you get accustomed to some of that. And so when you're being processed out, they do have a program to help you adjust to civilian life. But even that doesn't prepare you for some of the surprises. So when I got hurt, I was grateful for the community that I built within my own department and division and just um, my overall ship. Um, because they all rallied around me. And, my parents had to be flown. They had to fly down and they had to stay on base, which they were able to stay at the Ronald McDonald House,
Mm,
um, which allowed them, I want to say they didn't even have to pay for their stay. My division rallied around and just kind of crowdfunded way before, GoFundMe was popular. Everybody kind of threw their money in a hat and built up resources for my parents to help pay for some debt that I had at that time. But I really give a lot of credit to the social workers and the benefit advocates who really pressed for me to get all of the benefits that I was entitled to simply because I served. And so without them navigating those systems, as you said, and I think that kind of marks like the difference between what civilians have to go through, and also what veterans and other military personnel what they experience in terms of their transition. I remember my benefits uh, counselor said something to me I'll never forget to this day. He he saw when my benefits got processed. He said, "I have never in all my career seen it processed this quickly," which gives you insight into how broken the system is. Now, if I, as a veteran, who it almost seems like we get kind of like front of the line passes uh, for good behavior, if it takes a while for me or somebody else to experience getting what they need, and we know how crucial and vital that these life-saving types of aid can be. I can only imagine what others are going through and experiencing.
No, absolutely. And I think a big part is that, many people, as you mentioned, like they don't plan. They assume something. I think a lot of us who don't have experience with disability yet, we assume that, if something happens, you go to the hospital, they take care of you, they show you what the plan is. And unfortunately, wake up call, that is not true. Unless you're part of a system that is all inclusive and all coordinated like the VA, it really is contingent on you to navigate the system, work with different systems, different hospitals that you're going to be treated at, make sure that they're talking to each other, make sure that they're talking to your insurance. It's not going to be a seamless process. And it is so easy to get lost. And later on we'll talk about the Centers for Independent Living, which later this month, which is a network of nonprofits that are designed to help navigate the system, that really came out, I believe, in the wake of the American with Disabilities Act, to help with that issue of people falling through the cracks. But that's a major problem, and kind of tied to that problem is how much the U.S. spends per capita on these social safety net programs compared to other countries.
Where do
Um,
you think we rank?
uh, well, I would love for us to rank number one. That honor is given up to France. Uh, Corey, where do you know?
Yeah, I know France is at the top and uh, the US is 10th.
Yeah, so we are 10th. I believe that's as of 2021.
Yep,
Um, or are we 11th? I think, or Canada is either before or after us, but we're right next to Canada.
yep.
Um, some other countries in front of us are the UK, Germany, a lot of European countries, Japan, um, and several others. But the interesting thing is that even though we range 10th in our uh, the percentage, we do pay the most for these programs out of everyone. A lot of that has to do with the cost of our healthcare system. A lot of that has to do with the size of our country and population in comparison. But you really can't say that we spend the most out of everyone because those factors, the population. You really have to look at the the percentage per capita, which is pretty sad. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think they're also I think they're just talking about like kind of like the GDP that, what we take in is that percentage that gets spent out of there where France is, I think, like almost like 30% or something like that. And we are, I think, around like 18.7%, something to that effect. But, you know, it goes to show that there's just this level of need that has to be addressed. And the bigger part is that, and we've gotten into this before, is kind of like accessible design. Society was just not built to kind of include those of us with disabilities, and we're kind of like behind in trying to figure out how do we incorporate it so that everyone can participate freely, fairly. We focus whether on one issue or kind of itemize everything. In reality, you kind of got to do it all and do more preventative maintenance than not. But one of the issues I think, as far as the standing is concerned, where we're spending money towards it is, people in government are concerned with, fraudulent behavior. There are people, which is the truth, who do take advantage of some of these programs, and they're benefiting. There are people out there who are collecting, maybe on a relative that may have passed away and they haven't filed, and let them know, like this, like veterans benefits, for example, that, hey, my grandfather passed away. There's collecting that check, collecting a Social Security check. But that also puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth, especially if you're really using the system to your advantage because you need it. And I know I can speak, personally, from that standpoint, because every time I call up the VA, whether I need a wheelchair repair, whether I need, to get an appointment for something in dental, or I check into the ER, I know that there's a tremendous amount of resources dedicated to my healthcare needs and my benefit. And I never want to jeopardize that. While at the same token, I don't want to be thrown in a category, that there are a bunch of people just misusing the system either. And it's kind of like, how do you square that away where folks don't feel even more alienated or even scared to apply for benefits because they're under the false pretense that they'll be denied?
Yeah, I mean, on that note, on the denial note, these systems, because of that concern of fraud, and I'm not sure that's the only motivation behind this policy, but the benefit programs in the US, like Social Security, disability, they are designed, and Medicaid and other things, they are designed to be complex and difficult to navigate in order to make it so that only those who are the most determined and therefore supposedly most need it, um, get access to it. And that making the application process and the approval process so diabolically difficult, um, maybe it filters out some fraud, but fraud really isn't the issue. Um, it's relatively small, and if you're really concerned about costs of things, if you see yourself as a fiscally responsible person and you're concerned about social welfare spending, consider all the amount of money that is lost through tax loopholes, through by the largest corporations and the wealthiest taxpayers. The IRS, every dollar that is spent on IRS enforcement, of these supposedly biggest taxpayers, corporations, and others, every dollar that is spent, they get $5 to $9 in revenue in return. Uh, if you invest in IRS enforcement, we're not talking about IRS enforcement of like everyday taxpayers, you and me. We're talking about millionaires, billionaires, large corporations, who pay literally some pay $0 in taxes because they're able to write off things and put their profits in other countries, and use tax loopholes. So if you want to go after fraud, there's a place to go after it. If you compare the amount of fraud happening in the tax system versus what's happening in social welfare systems, they are not comparable. Just as a counterpoint on that.
I appreciate that. I guess that's probably why people become less disengaged with politics and democracy in general.
No, absolutely. Um, and in the few minutes we have remaining, I think one reason why people become less disengaged is, government and democracy is not delivering improvements to these programs fast enough. And it's so slow because politicians aren't listening. Maybe that's because there aren't enough politicians living with disabilities. Maybe it's because some politicians with disabilities either aren't listening to the community that they came from or belong to. All of us are corruptible. All of us can be embarrassed of disability and the vulnerabilities that entails. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president who helped us win World War II, who brought us out of the Greatest Depression, the only president to serve 3 terms of office, was a paraplegic. And people still don't know that. sometimes. You know, that's still sometimes a difficult thing to think because he could not have done what he did if he was public about it. There was I don't know if it was embarrassment or what, a social necessity at that time. But that's still a factor at play. We are not yet comfortable with disability in the public sphere as much as we need to, especially in politics.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's gotten ugly and coming off of a time where, you know, it's family friendly and everyone wants to see each other and especially eat good food. Most people do not have an appetite for politics during this time period. Well, the New Year's and now that the ball is dropping, it's basically time to get the ball rolling. And these social safety nets, they aren't a luxury. They're an imperative. People with various types of disabilities are dependent on them, not merely for their financial benefit, but for their very lives to continue moving forward peacefully, collectively. If we better understand the importance of social safety nets and advocate jointly together on a subject that single-handedly involves or will involve all of us at some point in time, will help us better preserve our democracy for future generations to come. So, man, this was a great discussion, as always, and I look forward to what we'll be covering um, this year. And I'm, excited to see, you know, what people have to say about these things.
No, absolutely. And I forgot to mention 6.3% of our representatives in the US at the federal level live with a disability.
Wow, drastically underrepresented.
Underrepresented. And I wonder what percentage of those individuals it's due to how old they are. I know we have we need some young people with disabilities and representing us.
Not to
Um,
mention an accessible uh, capital as
oh
well
my gosh.
to come
Oh
in
my
and
gosh.
be able to serve whether or not they have a severe disability or visually impaired or hearing impaired.
You know, under the Capitol building, they have a little they have a little train that takes senators and representatives from different parts to to the main chamber where they have to vote, and it's
Yeah.
there to get them there on time.
Uh,
And there are tunnels that are really steep that are difficult to walk up. And they have to get there in time to vote, right? Those trains aren't accessible. They say no strollers or carts allowed.
oh, wow.
And yeah, I'm not sure how I feel being referred to as a cart, but I'll take it. So anyway, stay tuned, y'all, and join us next week. The podcast is becoming a weekly thing, and each month we'll be covering a different topic. So sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn more about the topic we will cover next. And make sure to subscribe and follow us on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking. That's then with an A.
Excellent, excellent. Well, until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
Keep adapting.
all right.
All
Looking
right,
forward.
Corey. Happy New Year. Looking forward
Happy
to
New
next
Year,
week.
sir. Yes.
All right. Catch you later.
Peace.